Now, this subsection, we're going to be looking at electoral geography. In democracies, an important connection between citizens and state is the electoral process, which is the methods used in a country for selecting leaders. In this type of process, people vote directly for issues or for representatives. If it's a strict democracy, they vote straight on the issue. If it is a republic type of an election, you're voting for a representative. The United States has a democratic republic because on the local level we vote for the specific issue, but then on the state or national level we have a representative that makes those decisions for us. Now, I want to define what electoral geography means. Electoral geography is the study of how the spatial configuration of electoral districts and voting patterns reflect and influence social and political affairs. So we're looking at how elections can actually influence the people. Case study of this is the United States. Boundaries within the United States are separated into 435 legislative districts. Each district elects one representative to the lower house of the legislature, known as the House of Representatives. Boundaries for the House of Representatives voting is redrawn every 10 years to ensure that representation is fair. The difference between this and European countries is European countries allow independent commissions to redraw these boundaries. But the United States, this job goes to the state legislatures. Now, the problem with this is they usually attempt to redraw boundaries to improve the chances of their political party winning seats. This is known as gerrymandering. A little bit about the story of gerrymandering. There was a man by the name of Elbridge Gerry in the 19th century, and he lived in Massachusetts. There were 9 districts within Massachusetts that had voting rights. Gerry redrew the shape of these voting districts to look like a salamander. He wanted to ensure that the election of a Republican took place. And this did happen, and a new term was named after his efforts. Now, switching gears here to wrap up this lesson. Core areas and capital cities. First, we're going to look at core areas. Most of the early nation states grew over time from their core areas. This growth generally stopped when they bumped into other nation states. So the core area is kind of the beginnings of that city or of that nation state. Today, most European countries still have the same core areas as they did in their beginning. As you travel away from the core area of a state, you travel into that state's periphery or outlying area. In the periphery, towns generally get smaller, factories get fewer, and open land becomes much more common. States with more than one core area are known as multi-core states, and this may be a problem, especially if they're ethnically diverse. For example, Nigeria has a northern core, which is made up of Muslims, and a southern core, which is made up of Christians. These two core areas, because it's a multi-core state, they have issues between these two based on religious principles. But a multi-core state does not have to be problematic. The United States, for example, is a multi-cored nation because you have the West Coast as a core and you have the northeastern coastline as a core as well. So a state can have a multi-core, it can be a multi-core nation state or a state, and it can have problems, but it doesn't have to. And now moving on to capital cities. Not only do capital cities house the government, but they also serve as the economic and cultural center of that state. If no other city comes close to rivaling the capital city in terms of size or influence, the capital city is known as a primate city. Now again, these are predominantly found in Latin America, but they're also found in other parts of the world. Mexico City is a great example of this in Latin America, but then you also have Paris, France, in Europe as an example of a primate city. If the capital city serves as a model for national objectives, especially for economic development, future hopes, it is sometimes called a forward capital. Japan's relocation of its capital from Kyoto to Tokyo is an example of a forward capital because it's representing future hopes. Brazil is also another example. Brazil's population stretched along the coastline, and its capital was at Rio de Janeiro. To refocus Brazil on its interior wealth, its leaders decided to build Brasilia from scratch, far from the coast. This was to symbolize a new continental attitude and to get the focus from the coast to the interior area, and they did this by moving the economy so that population would follow. Now, we're looking at an entirely new heading here of terrorism and conflict. The definition for terrorism is the systematic use of violence by a group in order to intimidate a population or coerce a government into granting its demands. There's distinctive characteristics of terrorism. Number one, trying to achieve objectives through organized acts that spread fear. Number two, viewing violence as a means of bringing widespread publicity to the goals of the people. And number three, believing in a cause so strongly that you do not hesitate to attack. Now, the next section, I want to look at the different terrorism against the United States, or against Americans. First is December 21st, 1988. A terrorist bomb destroyed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all 259 people aboard, plus 11 people on the ground. February 26, 1993, a car bomb parked in the underground garage damaged New York's World Trade Center, killing 6 and injuring about 1,000. April 19, 1995, a car bomb killed 168 people in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. June 25, 1996, a truck bomb blew up an apartment complex in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, killing 19 United States soldiers who lived there and injuring more than 100 people. August 7, 1998, United States embassies in both Kenya and Tanzania were bombed, killing 190 and wounding nearly 5,000. October 12, 2000, the USS Cole was bombed while in the port of Aden, Yemen, killing 17 United States personnel. And then, of course, you have September 11th, 2001, where we all know what happened. There were 93 people on board the flights, 77 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 terrorists on American Airlines Flight 11, which crashed into World Trade Center Tower Number 1. There were 65 people on board United Airlines Flight 175, 51 passengers, 9 crew members, and 5 terrorists, which crashed into the World Trade Center Tower 2. There were 2,605 people on the ground at the World Trade Center, 64 on American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon, 53 passengers, 6 crew members, and 5 terrorists. There were 125 people on the ground at the Pentagon, 44 people on United Airlines Flight 93, 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 terrorists, which crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers fought with terrorists on board, preventing an attack on another Washington, D.C. target, which we're not 100% sure what it was. The attacks resulted in nearly 3,000 fatalities, and 2 of the tallest buildings in the world, the 110-story Twin Towers of New York City, were destroyed. Al-Qaeda was responsible for this attack. Al-Qaeda has had several attacks since 9/11. The problem with defeating Al-Qaeda is it's not a single unified organization. Now, moving on to state support for terrorism. This is providing sanctuary for terrorists. First case I want to look at is in Afghanistan. The first case in Afghanistan I want to look at is when the Soviet Union sent troops in 1979 against the Mujahideen, or the Holy Warriors, which started a rebellion against pro-Soviet government. The Mujahideen was heavily outnumbered, and they were without capable technology to wage a war, so they waged a terrorist-type war and referred to hiding in the caves. The Soviet Union was unable to subdue them, so they left in 1989. The Taliban then gained power, and they ruled the land for 6 years until 2001, when the United States invasion kicked them out officially. Pakistan was even brought into this. That's another example of state support for terrorism. The war on terrorism spilled over into Pakistan. Navy SEALs came in and killed Osama bin Laden, who was the leader of Al-Qaeda. And the United States forces believed that Pakistan security had hid him there. Then we move on to supplying terrorists. First example is Iraq. Saddam Hussein was the president of Iraq. In 1991, you had the Gulf War, also known as Operation Desert Storm. The United States was there trying to kick out these terrorists, or mainly to kick out Saddam Hussein. They had no evidence for what was referred to as weapons of mass destruction, so that they left and demanded a regime change, which eventually came, but things weren't as peaceful after the United States forces were finished with this regime change than what they had hoped. Then we have the case of Iran. When Mohammad Ahmadinejad was elected president in 2005, the relations with the United States deteriorated. The United States accused them of harboring al-Qaeda members. Iran pursued the use of nuclear technologies, and the relations between the two have dwindled ever since. Now moving on to state terrorist attacks, and we're focusing on Libya. The government of Libya was accused of sponsoring a 1986 bombing of a nightclub in Berlin, Germany, that was popular with United States military personnel stationed there. 3 U.S. soldiers were killed. United States relations with Libya have been poor since 1981, when United States aircraft shot down Libyan warplanes over the Mediterranean Sea, which were all over issues on territoriality. In response to the Berlin bombing, United States bombers attacked the Libyan cities of Tripoli and Benghazi in a failed attempt to kill Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi, who ended up becoming the leader. Libyan agents were found to have planted bombs on Pan Am Flight 103 that killed 270 people in Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988, as well as 170 people on UTA Flight 772 over Niger in 1989. UN economic sanctions were pushed over Libya, but that didn't stop Gaddafi from becoming the leader. During the Arab Spring, Gaddafi, the leader, tried to crush protests with extreme violence, resulting in thousands of deaths and thousands of human rights violations. A coalition of 30 member states launched air and naval attacks that allowed anti-Gaddafi forces to succeed and take over. Gaddafi was captured and executed. Gaddafi is such a handsome guy, isn't he?